Hey everyone, another awesome week of Come Follow Me here. We're in Daniel this week. Now Daniel does go for more than 6 chapters, so we're only studying the 6 chapters because that's where his story is. The rest of the chapters are his other prophecies that he gives from other different experiences that he's gone through and what the Lord tells him to, obviously just teach those around him. And it's also just like a history of the time, like the overthrowing of the different kings and the wars that went on. So it's like history and revelation in there. So the first 6 chapters have almost like the lessons we can learn from, which are awesome, and we're going to look at those. But if you want to read through the rest of it, you go ahead. We're not specifically looking at it for Come Follow Me, but if you want to go read it, go read it. And if you don't want to read it all, here's what I do. I just read the chapter headings, and then if anything grabs my interest specifically, then I'll look for that. Otherwise, I'll just read through the chapter headings and go, awesome, nice little, synopsis of what happened in that time. But again, it's up to you and your own personal scripture study, right? As long as you try, that's the point. So let's start. We're in Daniel 1, and we're kind of look at a little bit about where he came from and why he's there, and then how he shows that gospel living best by living the gospel as an example. So that's really cool. So let's look at chapter 1. So we read that in 3 to 6. We read about how the king says, look, go over to Israel. This is the first, remember we did Ezekiel last week? He got taken in the second raid. This is the first raid. Daniel gets taken. And we read specifically in verses 3 and 4, at the 4 exactly, he says, bring certain of the children of Israel, of the king's seed and of the princes. So Daniel was royalty. He was part of that royal house. And then in 4, it's like those who are well-favored, skillful, they have all wisdom, they're cunning and knowledge. They know things like science. Who knew they had scientists back then? Yeah, right, but they did. The understanding of things, had abilities that, they had a higher education. So it would be like going into a city now and specifically targeting the most exclusive boarding school, for example. If you were in England, you take Eton, for example. And just that those are probably going to have the most educated, the most well-rounded, capable of doing things in the king's court. He wanted the cream of the crop, the prime. So he got that. And it says in 6 and 7 that who they were. They were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, Daniel keeps use of his name even though the king calls him something else. But the other 3 we know better as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were names given to them. So really, they're their slave names. Let's try and call them by their actual names, because a name is important, right? What we actually get called helps us to remember who we are, especially with these 3, because Hananiah means the gracious gift of God. Mishael is one who is like the Lord, and Azariah is God is my help. Now, I always said, on the off chance that I ever had children and they happened to be triplets, this is what I'd call them. So the chances of that are 0 to nothing. But I just love the names. So keep those in mind and what their names mean, because naming a child is important, and they had clung to their names and their identity. They didn't lose that. They stayed true to who they were. And we can read that when we're going to look through, if you start in 8, 3 to 17, and I'll just synopsisize it so we don't go over time. But they get offered, from the court, they get offered the king's meat and the king's wine or the juice or whatever that they're having there. And this is going to be good food for those people. But Daniel and Azariah and Hananiah and Mishael say, actually, no, thank you. We don't want that. Now, this could have been for many different reasons. It's most likely that it was a word of wisdom, cultural-based decision. But, maybe, too, they didn't want to eat heavy food. You're in a new place. It might have been foreign to them. Could have had spices on it that they didn't know what it was. Might have tasted weird. And sometimes the word can be adventurous with food, and other times we're actually, this is going to be hard enough right now. We also don't need an upset stomach. We don't need to feel sick. Maybe they even knew that they, decided to be vegetarian and they just wanted grains and pulses because that's what they were used to eating. Maybe the school or the learning institution they were learning on and becoming all these people, these fine young men were, that they were told that you only eat meat sparingly, word of wisdom. So, you don't have just meat and just wine. You need a variety of foods that are good for you. So whatever the reason was, again, it's most likely to be word of wisdom, cultural based, but they decided not to do that, and then said they had already sort of carried favour with the head that was in charge of them, the guy that was in charge of them, and he said, well, you really should eat it, it's from the king. And Daniel's like, okay, give us 10 days to prove that we're right, that this is not going to be good for us. And then if you go down, so where are we? Oh yeah, so 15. At the end of the 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. And I've written in my scriptures that because they took the daily portion from Christ, not from the king, they were listening to the Lord and following like what they felt was right and what was going to be best for them. And that is going to look different for all of us in today's life. You know, when we say the word of wisdom, that's going to be different for how each of us live. The important part is that we live the gospel by example, and it was their example that got them noticed, and that becomes very important. So in 17 it says that, you know, God blessed them with more knowledge and more skill, and he actually, like Daniel probably already had the gift of interpreting visions and knowing what dreams were, but he gave him a greater portion of that gift. And then in 20 it talks about all the matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them. He found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in his realm. That these young men who had just like fresh sort of high school maybe age, maybe early 20s, somewhere in there, missionary type young man age, could do better than all the astrologers and magicians. It's like, well, yeah, because they're following Christ, so we know that. But they were blessed by keeping their covenants in the face of pressure, extreme pressure, and potential danger. Showing by example, they were committed, polite, patient, and smart, blessed with God's gifts. And we can do this too. We can decide that actually no matter what's coming at us and what we're in front of and what we're being challenged with, that we can make decisions that are best for us based on what we believe and how we hold our values and how we endeavour to be Christ-like. And we will be blessed for that. And it might not look like it did for Daniel. It might look different for you. Probably will. It's going to be different for all of us. We all have different needs and different purposes, right? But we will be blessed for doing those things and honouring those covenants we've made, just like Daniel was, and just like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were. It's beautiful. Now, Elder Robert D. Hales, a while back, obviously, because he's been passed for some years, said, live your life to be a good example of what you believe in word and deed. So don't just speak it, live it. Because they spoke it and they weren't believed. And that's when they said, give us a chance to prove you wrong. Give us a chance to prove that we're doing the best for us. And it worked. And we'll get to why that was amazing, because the king noticed them and was like, oh, they're doing better than all the other people we've brought in. They're looking stronger. Why is that? And then gets to know them, and then that's how he gets to interpret the king's dream and how he gets to be not as oppressed and able to guide the king in a lot of ways that is good for all the people that are captured. So there you go. So that's number one, insight number one for the week. You know, how can we live the gospel by example and not just on the surface, but really, truly to our core, live the gospel by example. Think about that. So hang around. We're going to talk about, in Daniel 2, we're going to go look at the process and pattern of prayer. I'll see you there.